Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. We're your source for answers to questions about starting companies, building companies, and the meaning of life. We have a series of questions submitted by founders just like you and a panel of experts to answer them. All of our experts are former founders, investors, executives, people who have built businesses, sold businesses, and made all the hard mistakes along the way. And we will share all those with you in answering those questions that we have. My name is Sean Burns. I was a founder for about 20 years of companies like Flurry and Outlier. 2 years ago, I jumped to the other side. I started a new firm called Near Horizon, and I'm joined, as always, by Nick and Ash.
Hi, everybody. My name's Ash Rust. I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. Before being an investor, I was an entrepreneur as well, most notably at social media analytics company Clout and the co-founder and CEO of SendHub. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders, and I've helped more than 1,500 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I am co-founder and CEO of Navi. We are the gateway to the innovation economy. Our solutions help people and organizations start and succeed on their innovation quests. I've supported hundreds of startups and innovators along the way, and in usual fashion, I am quite excited to hop into today's questions.
And all these questions were submitted by founders just like you. So if you have a question, we would love to answer it in a future episode. Head over to thestartuphelpdesk.com or find us on X/Twitter as thestartuphd. We would love to answer your questions. Today, all of these submitted questions are about co-founder relationships. If you're a founder of a startup company, you probably have a co-founder. If you have a co-founder, you might have some friction in that relationship. It is not unheard of. It has happened before. It may happen again. So all of these questions are about relationships with your co-founders and how it works and how to work it out. Obviously, Ash, Nick, and I have never had problems with co-founders. It's all been smooth and swimming. But we've heard
I was actually
from other people.
one of the early cast members of the Care Bears.
And it's only good times over there.
Also, our humor here has many different levels. It's very sophisticated.
Yeah, 80s cartoons being a pretty important factor.
Okay, let's get started. Here's our first question, guys. My co-founder disagrees with me on most decisions, and as a result, we just avoid making decisions to avoid conflict. It is beginning to hurt the company. How do we get past this? Oh man, the number of times I've heard this one. What do you think, Ash?
Well, I mean, I think it's obviously a wrong thing to do to avoid making decisions. So I have to be honest, that does not seem like a good default. So I'm glad you asked, but please initially recognize this is a pretty bad situation. The way to solve it, I think, first and foremost, is to have clear ownership, right? Somebody is in charge of sales, somebody is in charge of engineering. They should have the final say on the decisions relevant to those departments or skill sets or functions. I think the other thing that people need to do is make sure you're having regular one-on-ones. Whenever I hear about co-founder friction, the first thing I ask is, how often do you do a one-on-one? And the most common response I get to that is, we talk every day, which is absolutely not the same. You need to be doing at least 30 minutes once every 2 weeks where you can have the space to rant at each other about all the things that have bothered you over the last 2 weeks. And then when you do disagree, just accept that means that, your decision or your idea may just have to wait a little bit. So if every idea that wins a debate still has to be accountable to a certain timeline, a certain level of performance, then eventually we're going to get to your idea anyway, assuming you were correct. Take a breath. And ask for accountability on the idea that's winning, where your decision has been overruled, and then its time may come.
Ash, is there an element of consensus versus executive decision making here, where even if you have a co-founder, one of them is the CEO, and so if you're avoiding making decisions, it seems like they're falling a little bit into consensus decision making. Do you ever try to coach founders out of that consensus mode into executive decision making?
I'd say I probably filter for people that are going to make executive decisions versus be trapped in a consensus situation, honestly. You have to be a pretty forceful personality, I think, to be a good CEO. You may not have all of those indicators at the very, very earliest stages, but the potential for that is something I would say we screen for.
So you hear that here, folks. Avoid consensus decision making. Everyone agrees. Okay, Nick, what do you have?
Look at you. You're funny again, Sean.
Yeah.
It's the AI. AI writes my jokes. Nick, what do you think, man?
Oh, well done. Good use of the tools.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, this is a fabulous question. My guess is that most founders face this, whether they know it or not. The tricky part is when you are facing this situation, and if you're not actively engaging in dialogue today, it is only going to get worse from here. The reason being is because your relationship with your co founder is the company. Your dynamic sets the tone. It sets the tone for hiring. It sets the tone for product decisions. It sets the tone for interacting with stakeholders. In short, if your relationship is dysfunctional, so is your startup. What that means is it is absolutely critical to sound the alarm and invest resources and time in order to troubleshoot this. Ash nailed it. He said regular one on ones is a fabulous way to be able to start engaging. I think that's incredible. It's pretty difficult to actually start one on ones with your co founder if it's not already part of your battle rhythm. And so, Ash, I'm teeing this up now. I want to ask you in a second, how do you break through and start one on ones when you haven't done so? And before I kick it back to you for that, final note I'll share here is here's what I know works for me. Typically, if you feel this tension building, if you feel like you are avoiding discussing something, it's usually because you're focused on executing and you think, I need to deliver, let me persevere. Great mentality, but you still need to take a step back and engage with your co founder. No joke, every time I've had a breakthrough conversation, the way it's happened is if I can show up for that conversation ready to listen, if I'm curious and I'm able to ask some questions to truly understand my co founder's perspective in a given moment, number one, we have a breakthrough. And number two, it's typically I learn something that proves that my assumption about the situation was wrong. And so if you can approach that conversation truly with curiosity and care, it's transformative. But Ash, back to you. How do you break through with a one-on-one when you haven't done so in some time?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a good point, especially if you're not used to doing them. It maybe feels a little bit strained or awkward. I'd say just start with a simple agenda. So first two items are what annoyed me about your work or behavior this week, what I appreciated about your behavior or work this week, what I'm worried about at the company right now, and then what I'm excited about. So just those 4 points is a good place of just sort of agenda items. Write those down before you get into the meeting. So you have to bring them up and then give each other the space to be candid. Ask people to be polite, but obviously you got to have a pretty thick skin in those environments because you're going to be giving it out as well as taking it.
I like it. Sounds like a good way to do this thing.
One quick note, Nick brought up a very important concept, which is your battle rhythm. And just so if you're not familiar with it, I want you to hear what that sounds like. There you go. That's the battle rhythm. Stay focused on it.
Great.
Oh, goodness.
See, this is how we know it's AI because we're bringing in new soundtracks.
That's right. Welcome to season 2. Better than the first.
I was really hoping you were going to have like a panting hippo or something like that. As you were doing it.
How do you know what a panting hippo sounds like?
I don't know. I mean, I was going to learn something today.
Next week on the episode, we will play a panting hippo.
All right, that's it.
Okay, let's move on to more questions.
Panting hippo that just ate pancakes. All right.
Oh, yes.
Okay, next question. I'm starting to think my co-founder might only be interested in the startup for personal reasons, like an international visa, and is less committed to growing the company fast. But this could be a misunderstanding. They're usually hardworking, but need a lot of guidance instead of being proactive. What should I do?
Well, let me jump in here because I think there's a few different questions in this one question. And let's tease them apart. The last part is interesting to me. Your co-founder needs guidance and they're not as proactive as you want, but they're working hard. That can mean they're in over their head. A lot of people are not necessarily able to scale with the business or deal with the ambiguity. Essentially, that's often a sign, not only your co-founder, but any employee is struggling because they need you to tell them what to do and how to do it. They work hard, but they can't be proactive because they're a little bit in over their head. You can try to help them. Coaching can help, but in many cases, you might need to think about bringing somebody else in who can run that function or do some of that work for them, because often it takes too long for someone to learn that new skill to get good at it. And the company might not have time. You might not be able to wait and see if this person can rise to the occasion. But it's always good to give them a chance and have that frank conversation, which is separate, by the way, from the commitment part of the question around, are they in this for the money and the growth, international visa? I have said this before, I will say it again. The root of most conflict is expectation setting. It is very likely you have two different sets of expectations. Maybe they are in it for the international visa, or maybe their expectation is that they're okay with a slow growing startup, or maybe their expectation is, I want to win, but I don't want to work as hard as you want to work. So it might be of two different perspectives. The only way to solve that is have an honest conversation and put your expectations on the table. I mean, Ash laid out a good formula for doing one-on-ones. This is a little bit different than that, where you sit down and talk about, what do you expect out of the company? What do you expect out of your work-life balance? What do you expect out of your co-founder? And just lay those expectations out there in a way most people find very awkward, because you don't often do it. But have that conversation, and you often probably will identify mismatches in those expectations. But I don't know, Nick, you would deal with a lot more founding teams than I do. What do you think?
Well, I would just also add, Sean, that as an immigrant founder myself, who's now a citizen, you can have two motivations in these situations, right? You can have the requirement for a visa as well as the desire for a growing company. So it's okay to have multiple goals in these situations, and you should be open and honest about that with your co-founders.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
I was thinking the same thing. Ultimately, it makes sense to have personal motivations in order to make the magic happen. And so these things are not mutually exclusive, and it's not, the premise of this question is not necessarily bad. I think, in fact, the way that I interpreted it was focused around, one co-founder is generally just concerned about the speed at which this company is growing. I took that as the root, essentially, of what this issue is. And so, of course, there are different inputs that you can be able to power into your startup in order to achieve speed. And ultimately, I think the key thing here is there's just a misunderstanding on what is the speed that we think is reasonable. And there's this concern that the purpose, so to speak, is the area of misalignment. To Sean's point, I think the golden ticket here is to make sure that you set expectations on what does it mean to work on this startup. So answering that question is key. A second piece of it is, once you've set those expectations, remind each other what it means to work on the startup. You can do that in a few ways, by syncing on it regularly. And so when you show up, you are setting the tone for what it means to work there. Demonstrate it, so lead by example, and then check the pulse with your co-founder to make sure that you have ignited the right culture and that you are walking that path effectively. So I think, again, expectation setting, and then remind each other of expectations and execute.
Out of curiosity, guys, have you ever come across situations where there was a co-founder of a company who did it purely for visa reasons? Does that happen very often? It seems like a very difficult way to try to get a visa.
Yeah, it's actually the hardest way of doing it. You actually kind of run into visa problems a lot of the time if you try to be a founder early in that process. Much easier to be a founder as a green card holder or a citizen rather than on a H-1B or a similar visa. So no, it's not that wouldn't be a smart specific reason for it.
I think in general, having differing motivations that drive you to show up and do amazing work is fantastic. And so finding people that have real motivation and real purpose, that's a good situation. And it can come in a lot of forms.
That's true. We don't start companies for fun. Something's going to be driving you to do it. And motivations are directly very personal. So it can be different for everyone.
100%.
Okay. Nick, what else we got in the question queue?
All right, let's do this. We had a founder ask us the following. This founder said, I suspect my co-founder is working a lot less than I am. I message this co-founder late at night and on weekends, but get no response, although they claim they are working, but just not responding. Is this normal?
I'm actually really looking forward to this question because I'm interested on how our three experiences differ on this, or if they're the same. I will start off by saying, I have found it very common that there is a mismatch in expectations about the working hours or the work intensity of a company, that you'll have one co-founder who's, I've seen this a few times, one co-founder who's single and their expectation is they're going to work every waking hour and everything goes into it. Another may have a partner or even a family and their expectation is I'll work as much as I can, but it is not all the time because I have these other things. And that can lead to a lot of issues, sometimes jealousy, sometimes frustration. It's very hard, even if there are no reasons. Some people just have different expectations. And this goes back to what I said before, is if you don't sit down and have a really explicit conversation about your expectations, not just about how much you'll work, but about how much you expect your co-founder to work, there's going to be conflict because the expectations somehow won't match. There was one co-founding team where this got so bad, not because the company wasn't good, not they didn't work together, is there was this weird jealousy. One of them was single and work all the time. Another had a family. And it got so bad, eventually they just weren't even talking to each other at all, which of course is the worst possible endpoint of a co-founder relationship. When it's gotten so dysfunctional, you just stop speaking. But it can start small like this. It can start small with this, like this person's not working as hard as I am, or they're not working as hard as they should, or these sorts of things. So I think it's important to recognize this is maybe not the end of the world, but it's the seed of something get worse if you don't get to the heart of it. But Ash, what do you think, man? You probably have seen this kind of stuff a lot more than I have.
Yeah, you're right. It's a common situation, and the communication expectations is the easy route to at least get started on solving this problem. And I think that a lot of the time people don't provide availability feedback, like, oh, hey, I really needed you on Friday night. You said you might be around, but you didn't respond to any text messages until 11 a.m. the next day. Like, that's something that a lot of people won't say to their co-founder. And I think you really need to provide that feedback. Again, be polite. Now, even if somebody has a family, even if they've got a lot of other commitments, early on in a startup, it should be exciting enough that their passion drives incredible outcomes because they will find the time. And if you're not really seeing that, then I worry that we're just kind of playing startup, and that's not a good situation. If that's the case, I suggest you move on if it's not working.
Nick, what do you think, man? Have you run into this before?
Yeah, I think that this is another one of those situations where we should absolutely thank the founder for asking this question. It's absolutely fantastic. And I see...
We're very grateful for the question, whoever you are.
Absolutely. This is another gem here for sure, because of just how frequently founders face it. I think without a doubt, number one, you want to be able to set expectations in terms of what does your commitment look like? You know, what's the cadence in terms of how you deliver value to the startup? I think the second thing is we got to be realistic as well, which is achieving great outcomes is the motivation. And so ultimately what we want to be able to do is to continuously set ambitious goals, drive real urgency, and then get there. And so you have a responsibility as the CEO in this case to set fabulous goals and outcomes, and then drive the urgency to achieve it, and to be continuously evaluating, are people rising to that occasion as well? And if not, figuring out how to troubleshoot. So great question. And there's some nice pathways to improve along the way.
For sure. Nick, you use an important word, urgency. I think it's important to remember in those early days of any company, you have to feel the urgency, you need high velocity, because there are founders that I've met who work crazy hours, but make very little progress. It's kind of all nervous energy and motion and flailing about.
Yeah, and lots of different projects.
Oh, yeah. It's like, oh, I'm going to do this and that. And it's kind of like, the reality is the hours you work should be driving towards an outcome. And if you're working a lot of hours and the velocity of the company, the outcomes are following it, that's great. But you also have to be really careful about judging your progress by the hours you work. Like, let's be outcome based. Let's see hours worked as a way to reach those outcomes faster with more velocity, more urgency. Working hours for the sake of working hours is a little bit like showing up at iBank just to put FaceTime in and sitting around doing nothing. Like, it doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't mean your company's going to be more successful.
Mm-hmm. Yep, couldn't agree more.
Wow. Well, on that, we have to end the episode, because anytime someone agrees with me,
right. I want to be real careful about breaking this delicate situation. I agree.
I had to jump in before Ash said anything different there.
Yeah. Good job. Cut.
Yeah, exactly.
We could spend 5-6 hours talking about just co-founder relationship issues, but we covered 3, I think, important and very common questions today, which is great. If you have co-founder relationship issues or other questions about startups, we'd love to feature them on a future episode. Find us at thestartuphelpdesk.com or on X/Twitter at thestartuphd. But for now, those are the questions we have. Ash and Nick, as always, thank you for your expertise.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
And we'll go off and set some expectations among the three of us about how hard I need to work in the future. But for now, the Startup Help Desk is closed. Good luck in building your business.